Howdy, at home people. All right, at home people, I have you unmuted. So if you're going to mute yourself, and if you need something during class, just unmute yourself and holler out. And that will work better, I think, because of the way Zoom is doing this with presentations. So I'm waiting for everything to get logged in. Let's see who's here. Garrett, I see you there. Austin, you're there. Zach, there you are. That is acceptable. Good job. Jamaica, are you there? Don't see Jamaica yet. We'll wait on her. Michael, there you are. Kaylee. Kaylee, are you there? I don't see you there yet. Well, hopefully you'll come in. Kylie. All right, make sure you have yourself muted at home. There's Jamaica. Hey, Jamaica. Let me just click on participants real quick. That makes it easier. Okay, Kaylee, you're there. Kylie.
I'm here.
I see you. Well, where is your name?
It's gonna be under Gracie.
Oh, I see it. Okay, gotcha. And then Ashley, you're there. Isaiah, you're there. And then we're in this classroom now. So Adrian, no Adrian, Harley, is Harley signed in online? There's Harley, you're here. Taylor, there you are. Thomas, I don't see him yet. Faith, right there. Griffin, right there. Marguerite, Marge, Fancy, don't see her. Mary, AKA. Say that again. Eli, okay. And then Wes, Michael. I don't see Michael in here yet. Okay. All right, I'm gonna just hold off on submitting that for a few seconds, but at least I have it done. All right, welcome to Wednesday. It's what day I think it is, so we'll go with that. I am going to share my screen with people at home, and we're going to jump into, here's my smaller one. All right, we're going to jump into where we left off on Monday. And maybe just to review just a little bit and then get into what you are going to be doing for Friday for me. If you look on the syllabus right here, you'll see that there is a worksheet type thing, I don't know what else to call it, that is due Friday, and that's going to be your online assignment that day. And I'll go over that before, after we finish this presentation, before we get into interviewing. And so it's working on reading some articles, deconstructing those articles, and kind of reverse outlining them. So you see how other reporters are writing, and you kind of learn how to emulate the style that reporters are using. And that's going to look like that. So we'll go over that in just a second. But let's go back and review a little bit about what we talked about on Monday. With news writing, we're going to make sure we find angles and not just report a bunch of facts, but actually try to report them with a purpose. We're going to, in our introduction and our lead, we're going to cover the 5 W's and H if applicable. We use an inverted pyramid for organization, and we need to use quotes via interviews with people for these types of stories. So you should know who the 5 W's and H's are, who, what, where, when, why, and then sometimes how is applicable if you are looking into that type of story. The inverted pyramid basically says you put the most important information that you need to know at the very beginning. So you lead with your 5 W's and make sure that you have that information crucial. And then you follow down the pyramid with, I hate to call it less crucial information, because everything you should be reporting is important, but it might be follow-up information. It might be where your interview questions come into place. In a regular news story, unless you are doing kind of a quote lead for emphasis, your quotes are going to come in the middle. And then your follow-up information about how to get more information or just some minor details of the story are going to fall at the end. And so what that looks like is this. You have this pyramid or triangle really, and it's inverted. So it's top heavy and then you end. And you don't necessarily have a conclusion like you would in an English paper. You don't have to reiterate the who, what, where, when, and why when you're ending your story like you kind of do when you're writing a paper about symbolism for an English literature class. So make sure that you follow this structure when you're writing, and we're going to do a few exercises to kind of help you see what that looks like. And then, so kind of checklist, we've talked about that. So what does the top of the pyramid look like? It is your lead, and I'm spelling it L-E-A-D-S. You may see it L-E-D-E. That is the same thing. It actually comes back from when newspapers were reporting, or not reporting, but were printing on linotype. And linotype uses lead strips, which is spelled the same way as lead. And they needed to have a way to differentiate between those two words. And so newspapers started calling the lead sentence the L-E-D-E sentence. And so you'll see it written like that too. And it was just a visual cue for people who used printing machines back when they used linotype, which was used lead strips. So the original spelling is still lead like this, just so you don't get confused if you see it written the other way. So leads for news articles are usually summary leads, and those are just going to give the key points of the in front of the story, the who, what, where, when, and why, and give a summary and then go into it. So you're reporting on a fire that broke out at Hardee's last night. I don't think one really did, but just as example, you would say, you know, a kitchen fire broke out on the at the Hardee's on Main Street Tuesday night, September 1st at 6 p.m. The fire department reported smoke coming from the kitchen and found a flame caused by gas. And so that would be your lead. You have that who, what, where, when, and why right there at the very beginning. And then you can follow up to maybe theories of how it started, somebody's quote, well, I saw that fire coming from the window and I ran over there. And then you follow up with, you know, what maybe the fire department recommends following the story. So there's your summary basic news article. When you get into more feature articles, you have more at your fingertips to kind of choose from to make it more interesting. Sometimes these can work in a news story, but I would not break the rules before you know them, if that makes sense. So you also can have an anecdotal lead where you begin with like a quick little story to draw readers in. The anecdote must be interesting and closely illustrate the article's broader point. A descriptive lead that begins by describing a person, place, or an event in vivid detail. If you're writing maybe a feature story on a big festival, you start off your story by describing the crazy costumes people were wearing. And then that gets people interested. The lead's purpose is to get people interested in your story. So they focus on the scene for the piece and use language that taps into the 5 senses. They also can answer the who, what, where, when, why. So, but for your news articles, focus now on the summary lead, all right? They're kind of the driest, but they're the easiest, but their purpose is to get that information to the public, okay? We're not painting a floral picture for them. We're telling them what they need to know about what happened. So the next thing that you need to make sure that you understand, and we're going to go into this more in detail today and Monday, but interviewing. Anybody ever been interviewed for a story? No one? Anybody at home? You have? How did they approach you when you were interviewed? How did they ask you to be interviewed? So they're asking for your opinion. So, and that's where you're going to get opinions for stories. You're going to get people's opinions in the interviews, and you're going to be able to tell the human aspect of the story through people that you interview. It's not your job to elaborate on the human aspect of things. Your quotes must do that. So do your research, know your subjects in advance, or if you're just finding someone off the side of the road looking at an accident and you're interviewing them, you make sure you know that they were a true witness. So ask permission, and then most of the time you want to record a interview. And to do that, ask permission. Use the device on your phone to do so. It gives you that backup to where if you lose the thing you scratched paper, scratch notes on, you have that backup. And you're also sometimes wanting to write down things. They might be talking faster. We have the technology, use it. Always try to plan some questions in advance when you have the opportunity to. And so pick some questions that you would maybe create a conversation with the person that you interview. And like I said, we'll go into this more detail and later on. And then when you have finished your interview, you pick quotes that present opinions or information that provides emotion. This is where you get that even in a news article. So for instance, a sentence, Jones has the confidence the team will have a strong season with 6 starters returning. The future is bright for 2020. I wrote this last semester. I'm excited to see what these guys can do with the experience they're bringing to the table. along with our promising new recruits, he says. The coach recruited incoming freshmen from top performing high schools in 6 states across the country. So you get the expectations. You don't write that. You don't say there's high hopes for the 2020 season. You let the coach say that, because that is an opinion, right? Even if there is high hopes and it sounds good and it's fluffy for a school newspaper, let the coach say that. All right. So, for instance, which quote to use versus what to summarize. You can get information from an interviewer that is not emotional or that is not opinion, but you still want to attribute it to them. But should you put it in quotes or should you summarize it for your article? So, for instance, many members of the Gardner Webb community are excited about new dorms to schedule to open before the new semester. Sally Smith, Director of Resident Life, is no exception. Here's the beginning of our paragraph. So here's 2 quotes I have from her. The new dorm will house 36 students in apartment-style units, Smith said. Or, I think the students will love the layout, said Sally Smith, the Director of Student Life, who's already planning to help students reduce clutter in their individual units by placing a communal Christmas tree in the lobby. All right, so which one of these do you want to quote? Which one of these do you want to summarize? Should be summarized. Why? So the new dorm should house 36 students should be summarized because it's just factual information, okay? We don't need to quote her saying that, but we can phrase it in a way where we know that's where we got our information, but the opinion comes in, I think the students will love the layout. So how does that look all together? Many members of the Gardner Webb community are excited about the new dorm scheduled to open before next semester. Sally Smith, Director of Resident Life, is no exception. I think the students will love the layout, said Sally Smith, the Director of Student Life, who's already planning to help students reduce clutter in their individual units by placing a communal Christmas tree in the lobby. According to Smith, the new dorm will house 36 students in apartment-style units. You see how we took the information that we got from her, we attributed it to her, but we didn't put it in quotes because it's not quote worthy. Make sure the things that you put in quotes are worthy of quotes. All right, that's a common error that new writers in this field make. They quote things that aren't worthy of the quotes instead of just attributing them by according to or other ways like that. That makes sense? Okay. So headlines. Everybody has to write their own headlines for their articles. Headlines must follow these rules. They must be a full sentence that is short and to the point. So don't do things that are not a full sentence. A lot of people do this with captions on photos too. Photo captions, if you are in photo classes, are y'all taught to use full sentences when capturing a photo and when captioning a photo? No? In general, it's best to use a complete sentence with a subject and a verb when doing that. Same thing with headlines. So a full sentence is a noun and a verb that's short to the point. It needs to be rich in information and clearly summarizing the target. It needs to be front-loaded, just like your article's front-loaded. It needs to be front-loaded with the most keywords because often users scan when they read. And so they want the things that jump out at them. It needs to be understandable out of context because a lot of the time these days, headlines are what are used to repost on social media. And so you don't need to have the rest of the article there for people to understand kind of what's happening. You need to make sure the headline covers enough information that if it's read on a tweet or if it's read on Facebook, that people are going to know what it is and it's going to draw them into it. It's gotten harder for people writing for news because it's become so important to make sure your headline is eye-catching without being clickbait. Now, clickbait is used a lot. It's even used by respectable organizations. And what I mean by clickbait are things that are kind of sensational to get you to click in and say, well, I don't think that's right. And click in and it's like, oh, well, you tricked me. You reeled me in with your sensational kind of quote. Best practices are to make it solid enough to where if your readers are going to want to understand it or going to want to know the information, they click into it. So here are some, uh-oh, go away. That's not supposed to come up until after the fact. Here, I will. Okay, close your eyes because I don't have it on presentation mode. It's showing this. So here are some kind of funny ones that we can try as a class. A fourth grade student has caused a company to recall pencils with an anti-drug message. The message on the pencils read, "Too cool to do drugs," but 10-year-old Arthur Metzler pointed out that when the pencil is sharpened, it can read, "Cool to do drugs." As it's sharpened more, it just says "do drugs." The Britain Pencil Company will now read, "Too cool to do." So let's come up with a headline for this. So at your home, and then right here, I want you to think for a few seconds, how would you headline this article? What are the most important things here? Is it that the pencil company made a mistake, like oversight? Or is it that a fourth grader caught a mistake? Or is that they changed their slogan? What would be the most important thing to kind of pinpoint here in a headline? There might be more than one right answer. So and here in class, they're saying the fourth grader catching a mistake would be maybe the best attention grabbing headline, because if a fourth grader catches a mistake that a company makes, that's kind of makes you go ding, ding, ding.
I don't know about the catching the mistake, but I would have like something about fourth grader and catching mistake about drugs or something, like including the drugs and fourth grader.
Including the word drugs, including the word fourth grader catches a mistake. So anyone want to try to come up with a headline? Write one, complete sentence.
Fourth grader catches a junkie mistake.
Fourth grader catches a junkie mistake. Okay, maybe a little bit sensational there, but you might be on the right path there. So fourth grade student, think of a good summary word right there. Fourth grader, because you want to make it as short as possible. So fourth grader. Take a second, think in your head. Headline writing can be fun and it can be frustrating because you want to make sure it's as best as possible. When in doubt, go with bare bone facts. So, if you're having a hard time with this and you really are like, oh gosh, I can't think of anything. And you could say, fourth grader identifies anti-drug message or like incorrect anti-drug message, something as simple as that. But you can do something more like that's more of a play on words as well, as long as it has that subject and verb to make it a complete sentence. So even what Austin said could technically work. All right, so let's move on to the second part. Here are some headlines that identify nursery rhymes, okay? So I'm gonna read it. I want someone at home or here to call out what they think it was. If you already saw it, good for you. So, boy kisses girl and flees. You have to recall your nursery rhymes. Anybody? Let me go into presentation mode real quick so I can, oh no, I don't have it one by one. All right, let's go on to the next. We'll check in with all these after to remind you. So blind rodents attack farmer's wife.
3 blind mice.
3 blind mice. Yes. Three blind mice. Men and horses fail to revive crash victim.
Humpty Dumpty.
Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men could not put him back together again. They failed to revive the crash victim. All right. The lamb follows mistress everywhere. Mary had a little lamb. Arachnid interrupts girl's young snack. Way. Anybody know that one?
Is it Little Miss Muffet?
Little Miss Muffet. Who said that?
Ashley did.
Ashley. Good job, Ashley. And then pumpkin shell solves marriage question. Anybody? Anybody? All right, so here, see if I can get it to appear back. There we go. Come back over here. So, Georgie Porgy, boy kisses girl and flees. Georgie Porgy put it in pie, kissed the girls and made them cry. When all the boys came out to play, Georgie Porgy ran away. All right, we got three blind mice. We got Humpty Dumpty. We got Mary Had a Little Lamb. We got Little Miss Muffet. Peter Pumpkin Eater. Y'all know that one? Peter Pumpkin Eater had a wife and couldn't keep her. Put her in a pumpkin shell, and there he kept her very well. That'd go over great today, right? All right. And then the last one we have Itsy Bitsy Spider. I want y'all to come up with a headline for that. Itsy Bitsy Spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. And the Itsy Bitsy Spider climbed up the spout again. How would we headline that? Spider escapes. Well, what's the ending of the story? What happened at the very end? Did he succeed? Finally? Spider finds success after initial failure? There we go. We're making him sound very professional, right? Okay. So I hope this kind of gives you a little bit of insight on to headline writing. The best thing to remember is just make sure it's subject and verb. It's a full sentence. Examples of not full sentences that you sometimes see is people start with a dependent clause, or they use a dependent clause instead of a full sentence. Like, boy riding his bike. I mean, that's more of like a caption you would use for a photo that I would say, make that into a sentence, please. Boy rides his bike versus boy riding his bike. It's just the difference between that. So I want to go into what I have clicked here for you to do for Friday, and then we'll get into a more detailed kind of how to do an interview. And this will last us for news writing and feature writing when we get into that. And it's just basically the best practices for interviewing to write a story. But for Friday, I'd like you to click into here where it says, Unit 3 worksheet, and that'll click you up to this right here. And this is a news story lead assignment. And it's basically, I'm asking you to read 3 articles from a reputable source. So a respectable news source, this would be a city's newspaper. It could be an online of one of the major networks. But I would stick to something that is known as a respectable source, okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to read the story and you're just going to deconstruct it to see how they led, how they wrote the lead and how they wrote the headline. And so you're going to write the headline, you're going to identify the story's lead, and then you're going to identify the who, what, where, when from, I didn't put why in there, but at least identify the who, what, where, when for each one. And so this is just asking you to use your critical thinking skills and review how other writers have done this in the past. Then I have a second part to it where I'm asking you to take one of the articles, doesn't matter which one, and then break it down and put it into the inverted pyramid. So you can just write in or type in. This is a PDF, so you can, if you have a way to write in on a PDF and then just resave it, or if you want to print it out, write in with your hand and then take a picture of it and then upload it, that's fine too. But then where would you put, if you were the writer, how would you basically say, this is how I organized my my article? Make sure you're choosing a news story and not a feature story. So you're wanting one that's reporting on something that that is an event or some type of news item that's definitely not opinion and definitely not going into like a feature aspect. So any questions about this? Okay. All right. So the art of interviewing, how to interview for the story you want. We're going to go and try to get through most of this today, but we'll finish it up on Monday. Actually, no, we will not finish it on Monday. Monday is a holiday. We will finish it on Wednesday. You have Monday off, and it's the first time ever, so it's new for everybody. But we'll finish it Wednesday. Just as a reminder, your article, oh, another thing, sorry. I have on the syllabus, before I forget, on the Shobi entry where you put this, add as a comment, you know, you can add a comment in after you've uploaded a file, your topic for your hard news story #1. So by Friday, you need to have your first topic. Add that in as a comment on that post. So, and then your first draft of it, I would like for you to have a first draft by Wednesday before class. It can be a working draft, but we're going to do some peer editing and review during that class. And so how I think I'm going to do this, because I don't want people to have to print out things, I want you to try to submit it to Shobi before class, and then I'm going to download them and then like send them out via, I don't know yet. I'm going to find a good way to get them to different people, even if I have to email them individually, you know, like take them and then like email them individually. Or what I could do is have you kind of partner up with someone that's in the classroom and have you email them to that person personally, so I don't have to email out 18 different stories. So, so we'll do that in class on Wednesday. So y'all will be back here and y'all will still be at home. So I won't see you for a while, but just we'll make it work. This is an experiment in making education work this semester. So any questions about the logistics for that? Make sure you follow the syllabus to kind of know what's coming up, but I would like a working draft by Wednesday so we can kind of work on editing. You should have a working headline by then, and then your final for that is due next Friday on Shobi. All right? Any questions? Everybody have some type of idea for a story? If not, just make sure you are getting there by Friday. You need to have it to where you can at least interview one person via phone, email, whatever you choose to do. All right, so let's get into interviewing. We've kind of already talked about this, and then here is a short little YouTube clip that talks, it's Katie Couric. It's an interview of Katie Couric, who of course was a well-known TV reporter, known for pretty good interviewing skills. Better than pretty good. She was known for having great interviewing skills. She still is. She's not dead. But I'm gonna show this little 5-minute clip real quick. Can y'all hear that at home? It's a little. Hey, thumbs up if you can hear it at home. Okay.
YouTube, I'm Tony Macelas. I'm a producer here at the CBS Evening News, and I have the pleasure of working with Katie Couric on a very regular basis. Pleasure. It's a pleasure. And you're obviously known for your interview skills. So there's this new channel at YouTube called Reporter Center, and they wanted us to just ask you a few questions about what makes a good interview.
Okay.
So maybe the first question would be, what makes somebody a good interviewer?
Well, I think it's really important, Tony, to be a gracious host, because I think the more comfortable you make someone feel, the better interview you'll ultimately get. So I know that in terms of body language, I always try to be very warm and welcoming. And I think it's really critical to put someone at ease. I think also you have to calibrate your tone depending on what interview you're doing. If I'm talking to David Duke about, anti-Semitism or racism, obviously I'll have a very different tone. I'll be much more pugnacious than I would be when I'm talking to someone who may have suffered a personal tragedy. So I think it's really important to be very empathetic in some cases, and then to know when you're going to be loaded for bear and really try to elicit important information from someone who may be a bit oily and not direct in answering your questions.
How do you prepare for an interview?
Well, I try to do a combination of explaining what I can in the body of the question without going on and on. And I try to ask questions, obviously, that don't require a yes or no answer, because that's a disaster, because you're left kind of with a lot of dead air. And depending on who I'm talking to, I fashion my questions that way. And I sometimes go through them and think, well, how is this person likely to answer this? And what would be an appropriate follow-up? And knowing what they've said in previous interviews or their positions on various issues, I think, well, how can I go at this another way? Sometimes it happens spontaneously, obviously, when someone doesn't answer your questions. But at other times, I think you can predict appropriate follow-up questions.
It might sound a little bit Captain Obvious, but listening is probably really important, right?
Very, very. Nothing is worse for me than as a viewer to watch someone go down a laundry list of questions and not explore something with a little more depth after someone has answered a question already, to not pick up on something, maybe an inconsistency or something that may be news, and follow up on that and use that as the springboard to go into a whole different area. I think you need to use your questions as sort of a template, but you have to be willing to listen, as you said, Tony, and really veer off in a totally different direction. I can't stand it when people don't have the ability to do that. I'm like, it makes me crazy.
Now, that being said, have you ever had an interview go pretty far south on you where you're sitting there like, what do I do now?
Yeah, well, it is hard. Sometimes people freeze. Sometimes they're just cranky. I had an actor who I interviewed, who shall remain nameless, who just didn't want to be bothered. It really annoyed me because I was giving him a lot of time on national television and he clearly didn't want to be there. But I one member of the Flying Wallendas, I know, why was I interviewing them? This woman answered every question with a monosyllabic answer, and it was very frustrating to kind of get her to elaborate. And then Bobcat Goldthwait, the comedian, I sort of missed the memo that he screamed, so I kept asking him, why are you yelling at me? And I didn't realize stupidly that that was part of his shtick. That was
Did you know who he was?
Really embarrassing. I kind of knew a little bit about who he was. Now I certainly know all about him.
Oh, well, I'm sure you do the hard way, right?
Yeah,
You learned about
exactly.
Bobcat.
Exactly.
Any last minute tips that you want to give to people? Anything that anybody starting out in business might want to know?
Well, I think you should remember who you're serving, your audience. You're trying to inform them. You're trying to illuminate a certain subject, enlighten people. And I think you need to keep that in mind. This isn't a self-aggrandizing exercise about how much you know. It's not an opportunity for a gotcha moment. I think it's really to shed some light on how someone thinks and their position, and to allow them to communicate. And I think if you allow your interview subject to communicate whatever message he or she might have at that moment, then you've done an effective job.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's time for me to get back to the other side of the camera where I belong.
I like you here, Tony.
Oh, well, it feels pretty comfortable being in this light.
Why don't we
Anyway,
switch places?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but be sure to check out Katie's YouTube channel. It's youtube.com.
All right. We'll stop there. So I think she gives a lot of good points about interviewing, about directing the conversation, about letting the conversation go in a different direction if it needs to. You might get a better story that way. You are coming into it with your own questions, your ideas of something. But if someone gives you information that leads you to another question, then go in that direction. Okay? So before you interview, you want to make sure you think about your goals. Why are you interviewing this person? What type of story do you want? Think about the various feature stories that you might have, you might be looking into. Think about the various news stories that you can look into. How long should your article be? That's going to depend on how much you interview someone. So if you're just doing a news story, you aren't going to sit there and do an hour-long interview with someone to write a 500 to 700 word paper, right? You are going to, get a few comments from them and move on. When we get into feature writing, you're going to want to have a more intricate interview with someone, which it involve maybe 10 or more questions. And of course, you let some of those questions evolve as your conversation gets going. You also need to think about your audience. Write your questions depending on what you think your audience would want to know about the situation. So if we're talking about the fire breaking out at Hardee's, what would the Gardner Webb community want to know about the fire at Hardee's? How did it happen? Did a student cause it? What are some things that the community here would want to know? Is Hardee's closing? Are they going to have to shut down? So know who your audience is. We're writing in this class as if you're writing for the Gardner Webb community, as if you're writing for the online newspaper here. And that's a specific audience, but in a way, it's also a general population. So you're writing for the general public. If you're writing a magazine article for technology today, you know that the people that you're going to be writing for are going to be interested in new technology. They're already going to have some type of background in technology information, and so you're not going to have to go into tons of detail about minute things that they already are knowing. So what prior knowledge do you expect them to have? If you're reading a technology magazine, or you're maybe reading an educator's magazine, you're going to know that they have a background in that subject. And what do they want to know? Make sure you've done your research. You hear that Katie Couric had an incident where she was interviewing a comedian, and she didn't do all the research she needed because she didn't know that his shtick was to yell at people. And she was very confused at why this comedian was yelling at her. So make sure you go into something when given the opportunity to research who you are going to be interviewing. Know a little bit more about them. I'm not talking about stalking them on Facebook or whatever back in 2005, see what they were doing, but at least know some information so you're not going in and asking a dumb question. There is such thing as a dumb question. Don't let people fool you. Be sure to look and see if the person has a personal website or a bio on an organization website, especially say you're interviewing the vice president of student affairs. Look at what the school's website at least says about them, right? You don't necessarily need to go and stalk their Instagram page. Line up additional interviews. If you're going to interview one person for an article, it's always best to see if there are other people. Say if you're doing a feature story on someone, maybe a new baseball coach, you might want to set up the interview for the baseball coach, but then you also want to maybe set up an interview with 2 or 3 of the players to get some comments about their expectations, their likes, their side of the story as well. So think about the different types of people that would benefit your story. So always be sure to get the correct spelling of names and their qualifications and titles. And it's always good to get them on recording that too, spelling out their own name. So you don't have to go back and scurry around later to make sure you have that. Setting up the interview, basic tools that I would always say to have: a notepad, a recorder, a camera, a pen. Never rely just on one source. Always at least have 2. You can, if you're okay with videoing one or recording one with audio, do that, but also take notes as well. People like to talk to you a lot of times if you're taking notes, because it makes them seem like you're listening if you're jotting down things that you're saying. Test your recorder. If you've never used the one on your phone before, try it out. Make sure you're comfortable with it. That takes up a lot less space than a video. And so if if your phone always gives you the too much face or too much space message, then use the audio recording, not the video. Meet them at a place they're comfortable. This, of course, goes to times when we're not all wearing masks. But if you're in the situation where you can meet face to face and sit apart and do an interview like that, then meet at a common place. Don't make them come to you, go to them, especially if you are setting up an interview for that's going to be longer. Meet them at a time that they aren't too busy. Be respectful in that. Make them feel comfortable. I had a teacher in grad school who one of her teachers made their class all learn to drink a cup of black coffee before they passed that class. They had to sit down, take a cup of black coffee, and drink it without making any type of grimace. And if you're someone like me, I like a lot of cream in my coffee, and I like it to taste nice and sweet and good. And so I take a sip of black coffee sometimes. My facial expression would kind of be like, ooh, I don't know if I like that. You can't see my mouth right now, but it was making a sour face. But the reason why they did that was to not be the person that'd be like, oh, may I have a cup of coffee? And they're like, sure. And then, oh, but I would like 2 creams and 3 Splendas and a little dollop of whipped cream. And that's how I take my coffee. Don't make that person do all that for you. Sit with what they give you, be happy, make them comfortable. So that's kind of the mentality there. At the interview, you want to focus on making the subject comfortable, like we said, and get the background information out of the way. The interviews, if possible, should be in a neutral territory, like we said. The first interview question should always be, do I have permission to record this interview? Go ahead and just ask that. It is a standard protocol. The second question should always be, can you please spell your first and last name? And what is your title, if they have a title? If their title is sophomore at Gardner-Webb University, you don't necessarily have to do that. But if they are, vice president of student affairs, you might just want them to say that out loud for you. Make sure you thank them for your time. Tell them the purpose of your interview. And start with some easy questions first to get them going. Maybe just like, how long have you been in this role? What, some factual questions to get them going before they get really talking into more opinion or emotional type answers. Avoid lecturing the source, arguing, or debating. Even if you're interviewing someone out there who is in your face yelling, avoid fueling the fire. And then if you have someone that gives you a vague answer, just ask, well, can you elaborate that a little bit more? Is there anything else you'd like to share about that? Ask clarifying questions. Come prepared with several questions, but like we said before, let a natural conversation develop. A big mistake is to go in with no questions or to go in with a list of questions and never deviate from that list if the conversation develops. Be conversational, but let the source do most of the talking. Never supply an answer or suggest an answer. Be patient. Sometimes people just need a second to process their thoughts. If they're processing their thoughts, maybe just kind of rephrase the question in a different way to make them comfortable and give them more time for that. Take notes. Like we said, batteries die, tapes get misplaced or stolen, phones do too. And then when you conclude your interview, thank them for their time. Ask them if it's okay to contact them if you have follow-up questions. And ask them if there's anything that you would like, if they would like to add to the story, something maybe you didn't ask that they think is important. And then give them a timeline for when you plan to write the story and when you hope to publish it. However, do not agree to share your story with them before it is published. Your interviewee does not have the right to request that something be omitted or changed before publication. This, of course, plays into a lot of hard-hitting news stories or maybe things that people say that they then regret saying later. If they do say this is off the record, you hear that a lot on TV, you know, this is off the record. Respect the off-the-record request. However, when you are interviewing them, don't agree to show it to them before. I had a situation like this happen when I was living in Charlotte, and I was working, I was the editor for the magazine for the Junior League of Charlotte, and we were doing a generational story, and we did a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter who were all members of the same organization throughout history. Well, the grandmother was interviewed, but she was so, how do I phrase it? She was not pleasant, and she had nothing nice to say about what the organization was like today. In her day, it was so much better. You know, like she just kept giving those types of answers. And some of that was reflected in the article, but the person who was doing the article, so I was the editor and this is one of my reporters, and she agreed to let this grandmother read. And the mother took big offense to what the grandmother said, and it caused a whole kerfuffle, and we ended up scrapping that whole article because we didn't want to raise feathers. I think there was a lot of things in that interview that could have been done differently to produce a better article, but things like that do happen. All right, I'm going to stop right there, and then we're going to listen to some interviews on Wednesday to get you thinking and get you going about more specifics. So remember your assignments for Friday and for Wednesday, and I will see you all back then. Have a great weekend. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, which I don't do much because I have 3-year-olds.
We have Monday off.
You do. I'm not even going to show up.
Okay.
You don't either. All right, I'll see you all later. Yes, ma'am.
Can I do the Black Lives Matter protest one-on-one?